This is a brief introduction to moral philosophy or ethics. Moral philosophy is the study of how we should live, including what we ought to do, how we should act, what we should value. It's the part of philosophy that investigates our priorities in life. Moral philosophy or ethics may be about moral rules or guidelines or virtues that we should seek to have. These can all be expressed with various moral principles, so we will be talking about moral principles in this video. There are three characteristics of moral principles. I'm getting these three characteristics initially from Louis Poyman. I have changed the concepts a little bit, but he describes these in his book that is now co-edited with James Pfizer, Introduction to Philosophy. In any case, moral principles are prescriptive. They tell us what you should do. They tell us how you should act or what you should value. Just as a doctor would tell you, a physician would tell you what you need to do with your particular physical ailment, he would write a prescription, right? That tells you to go get certain medication, or it could be to get certain treatment, physical therapy, or use crutches, whatever it may be. It tells you what you should do. Similarly, moral principles are prescriptive. They are also normative claims. They are not declarative. They don't simply describe the way things are. They talk about the way things ought to be. If you want to hear more about the distinction between those two ideas, you can see my video clarifying the difference between normative and descriptive claims. They are also imperatives. They tell you what you need to do. These are commands or strong suggestions, some people might say. In any case, they are directives. So they can be expressed with sentences that maybe begin with "you should" or "you should not." A second characteristic of moral principles is that they are overriding. That is, they take precedence over other prescriptive claims. And I'm going to talk about four other types of prescriptive claims, and these include, first of all, aesthetic principles. Aesthetic principles might be something like, you ought not wear green shirt with orange pants, right? That might look odd. As an example, Gauguin, who was a great artist, he felt driven by his desire for aesthetic painting to leave his family in Europe and go to the South Pacific. Now, his paintings are very interesting and beautiful, and they are aesthetically valued, but it may be plausible to judge him for leaving his family in that historical context in a very dire strait. So morally speaking, he ought not to have done that. Laws are prescriptive principles, and sometimes moral principles can conflict with laws. That is, sometimes laws are unjust. They should not have been enacted. And that might lead to civil disobedience, would be driven by a moral claim. So, for example, Martin Luther King Jr. engaged in civil disobedience at certain times in order to get laws changed. Moral principles also override principles of etiquette. So, for example, here's a principle: you should not jump up and yell in a restaurant. That violates principles of etiquette. However, if you were eating at a nice restaurant where the ambiance is quiet and rather dark, and you got a credible bomb threat coming into the restaurant, in that case, for the sake of everyone's safety, you should jump up and yell to get everybody out. the moral principle has priority over the principle of etiquette. There are also principles of prudence. These are guidelines on how we should live our life in practical ways that would be to our advantage. These might be things like you should study before taking an exam. It would be to your advantage to do that. And moral principles could go against what is prudent. So, for example, if you lied to save your reputation, that may be prudent. If a political candidate did this, it may be prudent for them in order to get elected. But that does not mean it is moral. The moral principle of not lying for your own personal advantage overrides that principle of prudence. Finally, moral principles are doable. The principles should be ones to which we are able to conform. So they should not demand from us things that are not possible. It would not be a reasonable moral principle that everyone ought to donate $1 million to the Salvation Army at Christmas time, because most of us, of course, don't have $1 million. We would be incapable of complying with such a principle. So moral principles are things that we can do. Those are the three characteristics of moral principles that we need to cover in this video.